Folks, we're back. We're back. I feel like it's been weeks. It's been months. A whole lot's happened. Howdy, stranger. How's it going?
It's good, man. I expected you to emerge like Tom Hanks on Castaway, like just full beard, talking to, I don't know, a volleyball or something. But here
Yeah,
we are.
there were some.
It's good to see you,
The
man.
PowerPoint slide is just floating away from me. Well said.
And nothing happened at all while you were gone. Absolutely
Yeah.
nothing. Yeah, I don't know what we're going to talk about.
Well, I know what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about when CMMC is going to be in contracts. So, for those of you that missed the webinar, we'll provide the link below. But today we're going to talk about probably the most common question that people are asking. And so we think that CMMC requirements are going to show up in defense contracts in the first half of 2025. We're very confident in that. If you ask us specifically, it's going to be the summer of 2025. But apparently, the government thinks that this is going to be closer to March of 2025. And of course, if you're a subcontractor, then you are at the mercy of the prime contractors. And the bigs are all saying the same thing in their meetings and their webinars and everything after the rule. Either get in line for a CMMC assessment or get out.
Yeah, I think the line's been really drawn in the sand, dude. We see more and more of the saying that you are going to have to be CMMC certified to be on our contracts. And I think it's not CMMC self-assessed. I don't think that it's CMMC this. I think you need to have a CMMC level 2 certification is kind of what we're seeing communicated a lot more lately.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about what the bigs are saying. We're going to talk about what the estimates are saying. We're going to talk about all the information that talks about when CMMC is going to show up in contracts. But as I've said before, as I was saying on the webinar, the rules are getting longer. There are more and more of them as the years go by. There's a ton of context and information that people need to understand in order to have a solid grasp of what CMMC is, what the requirements are, so on and so forth. But the webinars and the podcasts don't get any longer. So you're trying to fit more and more information into the same size bucket. So let's just go over the very basics of CMMC rules and rulemaking to get everybody on the same page for those of you who are new here. So CMMC is a DoD program that verifies whether or not defense contractors have implemented their contractually obligated cybersecurity requirements. That is what CMMC is. CMMC as a program is implemented by two different regulations. Regulations are often referred to as rules in the federal space. Regulations are rules, rules are regulations. So CMMC is implemented by two different rules, a policy regulation and an acquisition regulation. The policy regulation describes all of the details of the program, the levels of CMMC, which requirements are being verified by CMMC, the various roles and responsibilities in the CMMC ecosystem, all of that stuff. This is referred to as the 32 CFR rule because CMMC policy is codified at Title 32 of the Code of Federal Regulations, often referred to as the CFR, Title 32 of the CFR, 32 CFR CMMC. The other regulation is the acquisition regulation. This implements CMMC policy in defense contracts directly. So this is the actual contract clause that says, go get this level CMMC, go get that level CMMC. This is referred to as the 48 CFR rule because federal acquisition regulations, part of which are the language in the contract clauses themselves, are codified at Title 48 of the Code of Federal Regulations. So all federal rules, all regulations go through a process known as rulemaking. And the very basic sequence that occurs most of the time is you get a proposed rule that gets published. The public is able to submit comments, and then sometime later you get a final rule, and that is the regulation itself. So the 32 CFR CMMC final rule was published in October, and it officially goes into effect on December 16th of 2025. At that point, CMMC assessments are commercially available to whoever wants them or to whichever subcontractors get told by their prime contractors that you must go get them, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But the 48 CFR CMMC proposed rule was published in August, and the public comment period just closed in October. So the problem is CMMC as a program is live assessments are commercially available, but they aren't actually in contracts as a DoD requirement until the 48 CFR rule is final. So the big question is, when will the 48 CFR rule be finalized?
So I think that one of the most relieving elements of this entire conversation is the fact that we're no longer answering questions of if CMMC will be a thing. It's now, when will CMMC be relevant to me? And that is at least something that is starting to, I guess, kick the dust up at the bottom of the barrel with regards to the interest, the awareness, and moving in the right direction. The problem is that realistically, with the timelines, you would think, okay, well, I've got until it has to be contractually placed in my contract. So that would be when 48 CFR comes out and there is a clause adjacent to it. That's not the case. It's not what's happening. That's not what we're seeing happening. And unfortunately, this all of a sudden revelation or this come to Jesus moment that a lot of DIB contractors are having are unfortunately after Jesus has been resurrected.
Sure. Yeah. That metaphor works just fine. But yeah, you're 100% correct. And as we've talked about in previous episodes, waiting until it's in your solicitation is waiting too long, because the administrative lead time from solicitation to contract award is so short on average that it's not enough time for you to wait to start from scratch when you see it in the solicitation. You necessarily have to start earlier than that. And we'll talk about that when we talk about what the primes have been saying. So the question is still, when will the 48 CFR rule be final? Because that is when CMMC requirements start to show up in contracts. So here's some numbers for you. Historically, every DoD rule since 2009 on average has taken 280 business days to go from proposed through public comment and then to final rule. So based off of the 48 CFR final rule publication in August, if it took as long as average, it wouldn't be published as a final rule until October of 2025, which is a very long time, right? However, the 32 CFR rule went way faster than the DoD average, much, much faster, like 30% faster. And so if the 48 CFR rule takes as long as the 32 CFR rule did, which was just published, it would be published in June of 2025. And there are several reasons to believe that the 48 CFR rule will go even faster than that. Here's a couple of them. One, the 48 CFR rule is much, much smaller than the 32 CFR rule. It also has a much narrower scope than the 32 CFR rule. There are also far, far fewer public comments that need to be adjudicated on the 48 CFR proposed rule. And then on top of that, it is revising existing contract clause language that was created in 2020, rather than creating net new policy language like the 32 CFR rule needed to do. So there's way less work that has to go in to getting the 48 CFR final rule. So it will definitely not take as long as its big brother, the 32 CFR rule. And even that did not take as long as the average timeline did. So we're very confident in estimating that it will be early summer of 2025 when we would see the 48 CFR rule. But that's the conservative estimate based off of the numbers that we've seen. If you ask the government, a lot of times they're indicating that it would go even faster than that. They feel like this is like, well, but wait, there's more commercial here, right? But wait, there's more. If you read the recent blog from the Small Business Administration describing the 32 CFR CMMC final rule, at the very bottom, they say that they think that that the DoD is going to kick off their rollout of CMMC in contracts March 1st of 2025. So we went from October to June to March. So it will almost certainly be Q2 of 2025, but don't take it from us. The SBA says March of 2025. So it could easily be Q1, for all those reasons we talked about, the 48 CFR rule being faster. But that's currently the range of estimate here is March to June of 2025. And that's not that far away.
Great man once said, "Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, a fool can't get fooled again," right?
Now watch this drive.
Now watch this drive. And so realistically, Jacob, There is no way in hell that this rule takes longer than 32 CFR.
No.
I will put myself out there. I will say it. I think that you firmly believe it as well. And I don't think it's just because it's smaller, a narrower scope, or fewer public comments, any of that, Jacob. I think because there is a concentrated effort to get this done. That has what's been the reflective attitude that I have noticed we have discussed over the past year when it comes to anything to do with the CMMC program and rulemaking. As much as people want to come out and publicly say this is taking forever, they're way past the deadline, realistically, stuff's moving fast.
Yeah, absolutely. It is moving fast. So as people might be familiar with, the DoD describes the process of putting CMMC in contracts in phases, which they call the phased rollout or phased implementation. We go into all the details of what the phased rollout might look like based off of when we expect the rule to occur in the recent 32 CFR final rule webinar that we did. So you can check that link out below if you'd like the visuals and the graphs and the estimates for when that would happen. However, that's all caveated by two things. One, each step in the phased rollout is up to DoD discretion. So there is no guarantee that just because you're in a particular phase that a different requirement that isn't supposed to happen until later won't be fast forwarded for a given contract based off of DoD's discretion. The other one that is probably even more impactful for most people listening to this, because most people in the DIB are subcontractors, is that the level of discretion that the prime contractors have is tremendous, right? That's really the big, the long pole in the tent here for everybody in the DIB is what the primes are going to make you do. So when we talk about considerations for subcontractors, just look at what they're saying in their interviews and their recent webinars and things like that since the rule has been published. So just to summarize this real fast, if you're a subcontractor, DoD's rollout is basically meaningless to you because your timelines are set by what the primes need. So at a recent General Atomics Supplier Day event, General Atomics got on stage and said, you have to get CMMC or you won't be able to work on our contracts soon. And then the Leidos CISO, J.R. Williamson, was giving an interview with Inside Cybersecurity, and he said capture teams will have to add evaluative criteria to the selection of a supplier where they must be certified under CMMC. Williamson noted that DoD will allow companies to bid for contracts if they will have CMMC certification at the time of award, but if a supplier isn't going to be certified for 12 to 15 months, then Leidos will not be able to use them, right? They will not be able to use them. So if you wait until the solicitation to get started on your implementation, to get started, to get in line for your assessment, and it's going to take you 9, 12, 18 months, as it often does for a lot of companies, Leidos, General Atomics, the other mega primes are already telling you now, November of 2024, that is too late. You're off the team until you can get that stuff ready. And it's not, remember, this is not a requirement in DoD contracts yet. This is what the primes are telling you. The DoD is sitting there being like, we're not even done looking at the comments that you submitted on the 48 CFR rule. And the primes are already previewing, their position here.
So those that might be familiar, it seems like that a lot of prime contractors are putting their subcontractors on PIPs. It's like a performance improvement. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, hey, just letting you know that you are lacking in this area, and if you don't improve,
oh man,
we're gonna have to get
the PIP for the DIB is that's brutal. That's brutal.
But isn't that essentially what it is? This is your forewarning that if you don't get your stuff together, your services will no longer be required.
I mean, this is the longest PIP. This is the longest PIP in the history.
It has been 7-year PIP. Like you're like surviving
years.
But it's crazy because if you were just happened to be a forward-thinking, I don't know, evangelist or a thought dabbler, right? And I don't know, maybe for the past 3 or 4 years, you came out and started shows and made LinkedIn posts, and those LinkedIn posts said something, Jacob, I don't know, to the effects of, if you don't get CMMC certified, you'll lose your contracts. You were treated like witches in Salem in the 1400s, right?
Oh yeah,
burned at the stake. But now, and this is a very, very big breath of fresh air, one of the things that you called for that you were very vocal about is primes. Why are you not saying anything? And now they're saying stuff, and you know what they're saying? Hey, y'all should have been listening to everything else because it's time to act.
Well, I mean, it's about time that they said it. One, I have my own personal grievances with why they wait until the regulation is final before they start telling people that the regulation is final, but that's a story for another day. Here's a quote that's exactly to your point. When the Leidos CISO was wrapping up this interview, he said that the supplier would be off the team and not part of the bid process because we run the risk of not winning that award if they cannot be certified at the time the award is given. This is exactly what we talked about in the PALT episode about procurement administrative lead time, except now if you're not the prime, if you're the sub, then what they're saying is that you need to have your certification ready before the prime is going to bid on something, even though CMMC is not a requirement to bid on contracts. Yes, in the back. Yes, Jason.
So from your extensive years of expertise, Jacob, do you feel as though the language that's being used by the primes and the message that's being communicated is one that the acceptable answer would be, okay, here's our self-assessed level 2 score?
Funny you should say that. No, level 2 self-assessment is a myth, right? Level 2 self-assessment will not be available in the vast majority of cases. And we're going to talk about the details why next week. But here's just how they described it, from the mouths of the primes themselves. My opinion is the probability of level 2 self-assessment being enforced that way is pretty low. I think you will see a lot of the program areas where a level 2 certification is going to be required are significant enough that DoD will want an actual certification. So we'll evaluate that over time. There's a reason why he's saying that. There's specific language inside the rule that is going to trigger C3PAO assessments at level 2 rather than self-assessments. But we'll get into the details of that in the next episode. If you want to figure out the details ahead of time, check out the link to the webinar that we did just last week. Also, if you want to know where to get started, if it wasn't enough for us to tell you over time that this was coming, maybe the primes will help convince you through their language. If you don't know where to start, we have a free tool on our website, the Pathfinder tool. It's a very simple set of questions that spits out a step-by-step process for you to get started down the path towards CMMC. We also have the CUI hotline and a weekly Q&A session that's live on YouTube and LinkedIn every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern. We are literally answering questions live as they come in. So if you have any questions about where you are, where to get started, then tune into that. And like I said, we'll have the link to the webinar down below, which has all the details and more. And then we'll see you next week.
See you next week.